The morning sun painted the desert rocks red as Maria Sandoval hurried toward the military outpost. Dust kicked up from her worn boots as she ran, her long black hair streaming behind her. The Apache reservation stretched endlessly around her, but today it felt like a prison. Her father was gone and she knew exactly who had taken him. Captain James Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the young woman burst through the doors of Fort Apache. The soldiers at the front desk tried to stop her, but Maria pushed past them with the determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. Her dark eyes blazed with anger and desperation as she faced the surprised officer. "They kidnapped my father, sir," she announced, her voice cutting through the morning quiet like a knife. Morrison set down his coffee cup and studied the young Apache woman before him. He had seen many desperate people come through these doors, but something about her intensity made him pay attention. Maria Sandoval was 23 years old, the daughter of Chief Thomas Sandoval, one of the few Apache leaders who had tried to work peacefully with the white settlers. "Slow down, Miss," Morrison said, gesturing to a chair. "Tell me what happened." Maria remained standing, her fists clenched at her sides. "My father left 3 days ago to meet with the mining company representatives. He never came back. I found his horse wandering near Copper Canyon, but no sign of him. Someone took him, and I know who." The captain had heard rumors about tensions between the Apache and the mining companies. Gold had been discovered in the mountains near the reservation, and suddenly everyone wanted a piece of Apache land. Chief Sandoval had been one of the few tribal leaders willing to negotiate, believing that cooperation was better than war. "What makes you think he was kidnapped?" Morrison asked, though he suspected she might be right. The mining companies had been pushing hard for access to tribal lands, and Chief Sandoval had been standing in their way. Maria reached into her jacket and pulled out a torn piece of cloth. "I found this caught on a mesquite bush near where his horse was found. It's from a white man's shirt, expensive fabric, not the kind worn by ranchers or travelers. This came from someone with money." Morrison examined the fabric. It was indeed high-quality material, the kind worn by businessmen from back east. He had seen similar shirts on the mining company executives who had been visiting the area recently. "The Consolidated Mining Company has been pressuring my father for months," Maria continued. "They want the mineral rights to our sacred mountains. My father refused to sell, so they decided to take what they wanted by force." The captain knew about the mining company's interest in Apache lands. He had received several official requests to provide military escort for their surveyors, requests he had politely declined. The Army's job was to keep peace between settlers and natives, not to help private companies steal tribal lands. "Even if what you're saying is true, I can't just accuse a legitimate business of kidnapping without proof," Morrison said carefully. "The mining company has lawyers and government connections. They could make things very difficult for everyone involved." Maria's eyes flashed with anger. "So you won't help because they have money and lawyers? What about justice? What about protecting innocent people?" Morrison had been stationed at Fort Apache for 2 years, and he had seen enough to know that justice was often complicated on the frontier. The government wanted peace with the tribes, but they also wanted the resources that lay beneath tribal lands. Men like Chief Sandoval, who tried to find middle ground, often found themselves caught between two worlds. "I didn't say I wouldn't help," Morrison replied, "but we need to be smart about this. If we go charging in without evidence, we could start a war that would hurt everyone, including your people." Maria began pacing the small office like a caged animal. "While we're being smart, my father could be dying. They took him because he wouldn't give them what they wanted. What do you think they'll do to him now?" The captain understood her urgency. Chief Sandoval was known as a man of honor, someone who kept his word. If the mining company had indeed kidnapped him, they wouldn't be able to simply let him go afterward. He would expose their crimes and rally other tribes against them. "Tell me everything you know about his meeting with the mining company," Morrison said, settling back in his chair. Every detail could be important. Maria stopped pacing and fixed him with her intense gaze. "3 days ago, a man named Harrison Blake came to our village. He said he represented Consolidated Mining and wanted to make my father a final offer for the mineral rights. He claimed they were prepared to pay more money than any tribe had ever received." Morrison knew Blake by reputation. He was the kind of man who got things done for his employers, regardless of the methods required. Blake had arrived in Arizona Territory 6 months ago with a team of surveyors and enough money to buy whatever he needed. My father agreed to meet with Blake at Copper Canyon, Maria continued. It's neutral ground, halfway between our village and the mining camp. But when he didn't return that evening, I knew something was wrong. My father is never late and he always keeps his promises. The captain made notes as she spoke, building a picture of what might have happened. Copper Canyon was isolated, perfect for an ambush. If Blake had decided to take Chief Sandoval by force, it would be the ideal location. I rode out to look for him the next morning, Maria said. I found his horse, but the tracks around the canyon were all mixed up. Too many horses, too many boots. It looked like there had been a fight. Morrison leaned forward. Did you see any other evidence of a struggle? Blood on the rocks, Maria said quietly. Not much, but enough to show that someone was hurt. And I found something else. She reached into her other pocket and pulled out a brass button. This was near the blood. It's from a military uniform, but not one of yours. The captain examined the button carefully. It was indeed military, but from a private security force, not the regular army. He had seen similar buttons on the guards that sometimes accompanied mining company executives. The mining companies have been hiring ex-soldiers as security, Morrison said. Men who know how to fight and don't ask too many questions about their orders. Maria nodded grimly. That's what I thought. Blake didn't come alone to that meeting. He brought an army. Morrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the desert landscape. The situation was becoming clearer, but also more dangerous. If Consolidated Mining had indeed kidnapped Chief Sandoval, they had committed a federal crime on tribal lands. But proving it would be difficult, and the consequences of failure could be catastrophic. Miss Sandoval, he said finally, turning back to face her, I believe you're right about what happened to your father. But if we're going to get him back alive, we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Maria's expression softened slightly. Then you'll help me? I'll help you, Morrison confirmed. But we do this my way and you follow my orders. One mistake could get your father killed and start a war that would destroy both our peoples. For the first time since entering his office, Maria smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was determined. What do we do first? Morrison walked to his desk and began pulling out maps of the territory. First, we gather intelligence. We need to know where they're holding your father and how many men they have. Then we plan a rescue that doesn't get anyone killed unnecessarily. As he spread the maps across his desk, Morrison realized he was about to embark on one of the most dangerous missions of his military career. But looking at the determined young Apache woman beside him, he knew it was also one of the most important. 2 hours later, Maria found herself crouched behind a cluster of rocks overlooking the Consolidated Mining camp. Captain Morrison lay beside her, studying the settlement through his field glasses. The mining operation was larger than either of them had expected, with dozens of tents, equipment sheds, and a heavily guarded central building that looked like it might serve as headquarters. Count at least 30 men, Morrison whispered, passing the glasses to Maria. Most of them look like miners, but I see several who are clearly guards. They're armed and positioned at strategic points around the camp. Maria adjusted the focus and scanned the camp systematically. The miners went about their work with the tired efficiency of men who had been digging in the desert heat for months. But the guards were different. They moved with military precision, their eyes constantly watching the surrounding hills. There, Maria said, pointing toward the central building. That man coming out of the headquarters. That's Harrison Blake. Morrison took back the glasses and focused on the figure Maria had indicated. Blake was a tall man in his 40s, dressed in expensive clothes despite the desert setting. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way, gesturing authoritatively as he spoke to the guards around him. He doesn't look worried, Morrison observed. If he has your father, he's confident that no one will find them. Maria watched Blake for several more minutes, memorizing every detail of his appearance and behavior. She had only seen him briefly during his visit to the village, but now she studied him like a hunter learning the habits of dangerous prey. The question is where they're keeping Chief Sandoval, Morrison continued. I don't see any obvious prison buildings, but there are several structures we can't see into from here. They spent the next hour carefully mapping the camp layout, noting guard positions and identifying possible holding locations. The most likely candidate was a reinforced storage building near the back of the camp, isolated from the main mining operations and heavily guarded. "We need to get closer," Maria said. "I can't tell if my father is in that building from here." Morrison shook his head. "Too dangerous in daylight. We'll come back tonight when most of the miners are asleep. The guard shifts will be lighter and we'll have better cover." Maria wanted to argue, but she knew the captain was right. Charging into the camp now would only get them both killed and leave her father with no hope of rescue. Still, every hour of waiting felt like a lifetime when she didn't know if her father was alive or dead. They withdrew from their observation point and made their way back toward Fort Apache. Along the way, Morrison outlined his plan for the night's reconnaissance mission. It was simple but dangerous. They would infiltrate the camp after midnight, locate Chief Sandoval, and determine the best approach for a rescue attempt. "What about backup?" Maria asked as they rode. "Don't you have soldiers who could help us?" Morrison had been dreading this question. "Officially, I can't involve my troops without direct orders from my commanding officer. And my commanding officer won't give those orders without proof that a federal crime has been committed on tribal lands." "But you know a crime has been committed," Maria protested. "I believe a crime has been committed," Morrison corrected. "But believing and proving are two different things. If I'm wrong about this, I could face a court-martial for attacking American citizens." Maria rode in silence for several minutes, processing the implications of what Morrison had told her. She was essentially asking him to risk his military career on the word of an Apache woman he had just met. The fact that he was willing to do so said something about his character, but it also meant they would be facing the mining company's guards alone. "There is another option," Morrison said finally. "I have two men I trust completely, Sergeant McKenna and Corporal Rodriguez. They've both served with me for years, and they understand that sometimes doing the right thing requires bending the rules." "Will they help us?" Maria asked hopefully. "If I ask them to, yes, but I want you to understand what that means. We'll be 4 people against 30 or more. Those aren't good odds, even with the element of surprise." Maria thought about her father, probably chained in some dark building, wondering if anyone would come for him. Chief Sandoval had always taught her that some things were worth any risk, and protecting family was at the top of that list. 4 people who know they're fighting for something important, she said. That has to count for something. When they reached Fort Apache, Morrison immediately sought out Sergeant McKenna and Corporal Rodriguez. Both men were experienced frontier soldiers who had earned Morrison's respect through years of dangerous service. More importantly, they both knew Chief Sandoval personally and respected him as an honorable leader. McKenna was a grizzled Irishman in his 40s who had been fighting on various frontiers for most of his adult life. Rodriguez was younger but equally experienced, a former Texas Ranger who had joined the Army after his family was killed in a border raid. Both men listened carefully as Morrison explained the situation. "So let me understand this correctly, Captain," McKenna said when Morrison finished. "We're going to sneak into a heavily guarded mining camp to rescue an Apache chief who may or may not be held prisoner there, based on evidence that might not hold up in any court of law. That's about the size of it." "Sergeant," Morrison replied. McKenna grinned. "Sounds like Tuesday to me, sir. When do we leave?" Rodriguez was equally ready to help. "Chief Sandoval has always been straight with us," he said. "If someone took him, we owe it to him to try to get him back." As the sun began to set, the 4 unlikely allies gathered in Morrison's office to finalize their plans. Maria had changed into dark clothing and armed herself with a knife and a small pistol. The soldiers carried their service weapons along with additional ammunition and supplies for a potential extended operation. "Remember, this is reconnaissance first," Morrison emphasized. "We locate Chief Sandoval and determine his condition. If possible, we extract him quietly. If not, we withdraw and plan a larger operation." "What if they've already killed him?" Maria asked quietly. The question hung in the air for a moment before Morrison answered. "Then we gather evidence of their crime and make sure they face justice. But let's not assume the worst until we know for certain." As darkness fell over the desert, the rescue team prepared to leave Fort Apache. Maria felt a mixture of fear and excitement as she checked her weapons one final time. In a few hours, she would finally know what had happened to her father. The ride to the mining camp took 2 hours through rough terrain. They approached from the east using a dry creek bed to provide cover for the final half-mile. The camp was quieter now, with only a few lights visible in the headquarters building and guard posts. "Guard positions look the same as this afternoon," Morrison whispered as they studied the camp from their concealed position. 2 men at the main gate, one walking patrol around the perimeter, and what looks like a guard station near that storage building we identified. Maria counted the visible guards and estimated their patrol patterns. The walking patrol passes this way every 15 minutes. If we time it right, we can get past him and reach the storage building. Rodriguez and I will take out the perimeter guard, McKenna suggested. You and Miss Sandoval check the storage building. If Chief Sandoval is there, we extract him. If not, we regroup and check the other possible locations. Morrison nodded his agreement. It was a simple plan, which made it more likely to succeed. Complex operations had too many ways to go wrong, especially when working with a small team. They waited for the patrol to pass, then moved swiftly across the open ground toward the storage building. Maria's heart pounded as they approached what might be her father's prison. In a few minutes, she would either find him alive or discover the worst news possible. The guard near the storage building was leaning against the wall, apparently half asleep. Morrison and Maria approached from his blind side, moving as silently as shadows across the desert sand. When they were close enough, Morrison struck quickly, rendering the guard unconscious before he could raise an alarm. Maria immediately began examining the building, looking for signs that someone was being held inside. The structure was solidly built with no windows and only one door, which was secured with a heavy padlock. But as she pressed her ear to the wall, she heard something that made her heart race with hope. Someone was moving around inside the building, and she could hear the faint sound of chains rattling against wood. Maria pressed her ear harder against the wooden wall, straining to hear any sound that might confirm her father was inside. The faint rattling of chains came again, followed by what sounded like someone shifting position on the floor. Her heart raced with a mixture of hope and dread. Morrison worked quickly on the padlock with a set of tools he had brought from the fort. The mechanism was newer and stronger than he had expected, designed to keep someone in rather than simply secure supplies. After several tense minutes, he finally felt the lock give way. "Got it," he whispered, carefully removing the padlock to avoid any noise that might alert other guards. Before Morrison could stop her, Maria pulled open the heavy door and stepped inside. The smell that hit her was overwhelming: unwashed bodies, stale food, and the metallic scent of dried blood. But through the darkness, she could make out a figure slumped against the far wall. "Father?" she whispered urgently. Chief Thomas Sandoval raised his head slowly as if the simple movement caused him pain. Even in the dim light filtering through the doorway, Maria could see that he had been badly beaten. His left eye was swollen shut and dried blood caked his shirt where it had torn during his capture. "Maria." His voice was weak but filled with surprise and concern. "You should not have come here. It is too dangerous." She rushed to his side and began examining his restraints. Heavy chains bound his wrists and ankles to iron rings set into the wooden wall. The metal had rubbed his skin raw where he had struggled against his bonds. Morrison appeared in the doorway, his weapon drawn and his eyes scanning for any sign of approaching guards. "How bad is he hurt?" he asked quietly. "Beaten but alive," Maria replied, working to free her father from the chains. "Help me get these off him." Chief Sandoval looked at Morrison with recognition. "Captain Morrison, I am grateful for your help, but you have put yourself in great danger by coming here." "No more danger than you've been in for the past 3 days," Morrison replied, moving to help with the restraints. "Can you walk?" The chief tested his legs as Maria freed his ankles. "I think so. They have not fed me much, but I am strong enough to travel." As they worked to free him completely, Chief Sandoval told them what had happened during his capture. Harrison Blake had indeed arranged the meeting at Copper Canyon, but he had brought a dozen armed men with him. When Chief Sandoval refused to sign over the mineral rights to tribal lands, Blake had ordered his men to take the chief prisoner. "Blake believes he can force the tribal council to accept his offer if he holds me long enough," Chief Sandoval explained. "He thinks our people will trade their sacred mountains for my life." "Will they?" Morrison asked. Chief Sandoval's expression grew grim. "Some might. That is why we must stop this before Blake can make his demands known." Maria finished removing the last of the chains and helped her father to his feet. He was weaker than he wanted to admit, but his determination remained strong. "What is your plan for getting us out of here?" Morrison checked his watch. "McKenna and Rodriguez should have neutralized the other guards by now. We have about 10 minutes before the next patrol change. If we move quickly and quietly, we can be gone before anyone discovers you're missing." They made their way to the door, where Morrison carefully checked the area outside. The camp remained quiet. with most of the miners asleep in their tents. But he could see lights still burning in Blake's headquarters building, which meant the mining company leader was still awake and potentially alert to any disturbance. "Stay close and move when I signal," Morrison whispered. "If anything goes wrong, Maria knows the way back to our horses." They began their careful retreat from the storage building, moving from shadow to shadow across the camp. Chief Sandoval moved more slowly than Morrison would have liked, but he showed no signs of complaining about his injuries or asking them to slow down. They were halfway to the edge of the camp when disaster struck. One of the miners emerged from his tent unexpectedly, probably heading to the latrine area. In the darkness, he almost walked directly into Rodriguez, who had been covering their retreat route. The collision was brief but noisy. Rodriguez managed to silence the miner quickly, but not before the man had time to shout in surprise. Within seconds, lights began appearing throughout the camp as other miners and guards investigated the disturbance. "Run," Morrison ordered, abandoning any attempt at stealth. The rescue party sprinted toward the camp perimeter as shouts erupted behind them. Maria stayed close to her father, ready to support him if his injuries slowed him down. Chief Sandoval moved with surprising speed for someone who had been chained up for 3 days, his determination overcoming his physical limitations. Behind them, the camp erupted in activity. Harrison Blake's voice could be heard shouting orders to his guards, demanding that they find and stop the intruders. Lanterns bobbed through the darkness as armed men spread out to search for the escaping prisoners. McKenna appeared from the shadows near the camp entrance, his rifle ready. "This way," he called, leading them toward the dry creek bed where they had left their horses. The sound of gunfire erupted behind them as Blake's guards began shooting at shadows and movement in the darkness. Most of the shots went wild, but the noise would alert anyone within miles that something serious was happening at the mining camp. "They will send riders after us," Chief Sandoval warned as they reached their horses. "Blake cannot afford to let me escape now. He has committed too many crimes to simply let this go." Morrison knew the chief was right. Blake had crossed the line from aggressive business practices to kidnapping and imprisonment. If Chief Sandoval reached safety and told his story, Blake would face federal charges and the mining company would lose any chance of acquiring tribal lands legally. "How long until we reach the fort?" Maria asked as they mounted their horses. 2 hours of hard riding," Morrison replied. "But they know this country as well as we do. They might try to cut us off before we reach safety." They pushed their horses hard across the desert terrain, using their knowledge of the land to stay ahead of their pursuers. Behind them, they could see torches and lanterns spreading out from the mining camp as Blake organized a search party. The mining company leader would spare no effort to recapture Chief Sandoval and eliminate the witnesses to his crimes. Chief Sandoval rode with the skill of someone who had spent his entire life on horseback, but Maria could see that his injuries were taking their toll. Blood had begun seeping through his shirt again, and he swayed slightly in his saddle as they navigated rough terrain. "Father, are you all right?" she asked during a brief rest to check for pursuit. "I will survive," he replied firmly. "Blake and his men hurt my body, but they did not break my spirit. We must make sure their crimes are exposed so they cannot hurt anyone else." Morrison studied the landscape around them, planning their route to Fort Apache. The direct path would be fastest, but it would also be the most predictable. Blake's men might be able to intercept them if they took the obvious route. "We're going to take the long way," he decided, through Devil's Canyon. "It will add an hour to our travel time, but the terrain is too rough for them to bring horses through quickly." As they resumed their escape, Rodriguez spotted movement on the horizon behind them. "Riders coming," he reported. "Looks like at least 6 men, maybe more." The pursuit had begun in earnest. Blake had organized his best men and armed them well for the chase. The race to reach Fort Apache would test everyone's endurance and determination. "How well do you know Devil's Canyon?" Morrison asked Chief Sandoval. The Apache leader managed a weak smile. "I played in those rocks as a child. If we can reach the canyon entrance before they catch us in the open, I can guide us through passages they will never find." Maria felt a surge of pride in her father's strength and knowledge. Even after days of imprisonment and beatings, he remained a formidable leader who could contribute to their escape. The mining company had underestimated both his resilience and his value to his people. The sound of pursuing horses grew louder behind them as Blake's men pushed their mounts to the limit. It would be a close race to reach the safety of Devil's Canyon. And Morrison wasn't sure their horses could maintain this pace much longer. But as they crested a low hill, the distinctive rock formations of Devil's Canyon came into view. If they could reach the entrance before their pursuers caught them in the open desert, they would have a real chance of escape. Almost there, Morrison called to the others, "Stay together and be ready for anything." Behind them, the first rifle shots cracked across the desert as Blake's men came within range. The real fight for Chief Sandoval's freedom was about to begin. The narrow entrance to Devil's Canyon loomed ahead like a gateway to safety, but rifle bullets whistled past their heads as Blake's riders closed the distance. Morrison could hear the thunder of hooves behind them and knew they had only seconds before their pursuers would be close enough for accurate shooting. "Into the canyon," he shouted, spurring his horse toward the rocky passage. Chief Sandoval took the lead as they entered the maze of stone corridors and narrow passages that made Devil's Canyon famous throughout the territory. Despite his injuries, he guided them confidently through turns and gaps that would have been invisible to anyone unfamiliar with the terrain. The canyon walls rose high above them, blocking out most of the moonlight and creating deep shadows that could hide an army, but the same darkness that concealed them also made navigation treacherous. One wrong turn could lead them into a dead end where Blake's men could trap them easily. "This way," Chief Sandoval called softly, leading them down a passage so narrow their horses had to move single file. Behind them, they could hear their pursuers arguing about which path to take. Blake's voice carried through the canyon, sharp with anger and frustration. He knew that losing Chief Sandoval now would mean the end of his mining operation, and probably federal charges for kidnapping. "Split up," Blake ordered his men. "Cover every passage. They can't have gone far in this maze." Morrison realized their advantage was temporary. Blake had enough men to search multiple routes through the canyon simultaneously. Eventually, one of the search parties would stumble onto their trail. "How many ways out of this canyon?" he asked Chief Sandoval quietly. "3 main passages," the Apache leader replied. "But Blake's men will probably watch the obvious exits. There is another way, but it is dangerous even in daylight." Maria moved up beside her father. "What kind of dangerous?" "There is a ledge that leads along the canyon wall to a hidden exit," Chief Sandoval explained. "It is narrow and crumbling in places. One slip means a fall of 200 feet. McKenna peered up at the canyon walls, trying to spot the ledge in the darkness. "Sounds better than getting shot by mining company thugs," he said grimly. The sound of horses echoed from multiple directions now as Blake's search parties spread throughout the canyon. It was only a matter of time before one of them picked up the right trail. They needed to reach the hidden exit before that happened. Chief Sandoval led them deeper into the canyon, following passages that seemed to lead nowhere but somehow connected to other routes through the maze. His knowledge of the terrain was their only hope of staying ahead of the searchers. "Here," he said finally, stopping at what looked like a solid rock wall. Morrison studied the seemingly blank cliff face. "I don't see any ledge." Chief Sandoval dismounted carefully and approached the wall. His hands found handholds that were invisible in the darkness, and he began climbing. About 20 feet up, he stopped on what appeared to be a narrow shelf of rock. "The ledge starts here," he called down quietly. "We must leave the horses and continue on foot." The idea of abandoning their mounts in hostile territory didn't appeal to any of them, but the sound of approaching riders made the decision for them. Rodriguez quickly led the horses into a side passage and scattered hay from their feed bags to mask the scent trail. One by one, they climbed up to join Chief Sandoval on the narrow ledge. Maria went first, her smaller size making the climb easier. Morrison followed, then McKenna and Rodriguez. By the time they were all on the ledge, they could hear Blake's men entering the passage below. "Fresh horse droppings here," one of the searchers called out. They came this way. The ledge was even narrower than Chief Sandoval had described, barely wide enough for one person to walk carefully. Loose rocks crumbled under their feet and fell into the darkness below. Maria found herself pressed against the cliff face, trying not to think about the drop behind her. "Move slowly and stay close to the wall," Chief Sandoval whispered. "The ledge is solid near the cliff, but weak toward the outer edge." They began their treacherous journey along the canyon wall, moving inch by inch through the darkness. Below them, Blake's men searched the passages with lanterns, their voices echoing off the stone walls. The light from their searches occasionally illuminated the rescue party on the ledge, but the searchers were too focused on ground level to look up. "I see where they left their horses," Blake's voice carried clearly from below. But where did they go from here? Morrison pressed himself against the rock wall as a particularly large chunk of stone broke loose under his foot. The fragment bounced off several outcroppings before hitting the canyon floor with a sharp crack that seemed impossibly loud in the night air. The searchers below went silent for a moment, then began looking up toward the canyon walls. One of them raised his lantern higher, and Morrison saw the light beginning to reveal their position on the ledge. "There!" one of Blake's men shouted, pointing directly at them. "On the ledge!" Rifle fire erupted from below as the mining company guards tried to pick them off their precarious perch. Bullets sparked off the rock wall around them, sending stone chips flying in all directions. But shooting upward in the darkness was difficult, and most of the shots went wide. "Move faster," Morrison urged, knowing their position was now hopeless if they remained exposed. Chief Sandoval picked up the pace despite his injuries, leading them along the crumbling ledge toward whatever exit he had promised. Behind them, more of Blake's men were arriving and adding their firepower to the attack on the ledge. "Can't get a clear shot from down here," one of the guards complained. "We need to find a way up to that ledge." Blake's response was immediate and chilling. "Then bring the dynamite from camp. If we can't shoot them off that ledge, we'll blow it up with them on it." Morrison realized they had perhaps 30 minutes before Blake's men could return with explosives. The ledge might be their protection now, but it would become their tomb if they were still on it when the dynamite arrived. "How much farther to the exit?" he called to Chief Sandoval. "Not far now," the Apache leader replied, though Morrison could hear the strain in his voice. The combination of his injuries and the physical demands of navigating the ledge were taking their toll. They rounded a bend in the canyon wall and suddenly found themselves facing a gap in the ledge. A section about 8 feet long had collapsed, leaving only empty air between their current position and the continuation of the path. "We'll have to jump," Chief Sandoval said matter-of-factly. Maria stared at the gap, trying to judge the distance in the poor light. 8 feet might not sound like much, but with a 200-foot drop below and loose rock on both sides, it might as well have been 8 miles. "I'll go first," Morrison said, backing up as far as the narrow ledge would allow. He took a running start and leaped across the gap, landing hard on the far side but maintaining his balance. The ledge crumbled slightly under his impact but held his weight. "Come on," he called to the others. "It's solid enough." Maria went next, her lighter weight making the jump easier. She landed safely and immediately turned to help guide the others across. McKenna and Rodriguez followed successfully, but when Chief Sandoval prepared to jump, Maria could see that his injuries were seriously hampering his movement. "Father, are you strong enough?" she asked with concern. "I have to be," he replied grimly. "We cannot go back now." Chief Sandoval took his running start, but his injured leg gave way slightly during the leap. He fell short of the far ledge, his hands catching the edge as his body slammed into the cliff face. For a terrifying moment, he hung by his fingertips over the abyss. Morrison and Rodriguez immediately grabbed his arms and hauled him up to safety. Chief Sandoval was breathing heavily and bleeding again from his reopened wounds, but he was alive. "Just a little farther," he gasped. "The exit is around the next bend." Below them, they could see lanterns moving as Blake's men searched for a way up to the ledge. Time was running out, but they were almost free. As they rounded the final bend, Chief Sandoval's promised exit came into view, a narrow crack in the canyon wall that led to the outside. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, which explained why Blake's men hadn't thought to guard it. One by one, they slipped through the crack and emerged into the open desert on the far side of Devil's Canyon. The cool night air felt like freedom after the claustrophobic passages of the canyon, but they knew they weren't safe yet. "Blake will figure out where we went eventually." "Blake will figure out where we went eventually," Morrison said, scanning the desert landscape around them. "We need to put as much distance as possible between us and this canyon before he brings his men around to this side." Chief Sandoval leaned heavily against a boulder, his breathing labored from the ordeal on the ledge. The escape had reopened several of his wounds, and dark stains were spreading across his torn shirt, but his eyes remained alert and determined. "There is a small trading post about 5 miles north of here," he said. "The owner is a friend to our people. He might have horses we can use, and it would give us a place to rest and treat these wounds." Maria examined her father's injuries more carefully now that they had better light from the stars. The beating he had received was worse than she had initially realized. Along with the obvious bruises and cuts, She suspected he might have broken ribs that were making breathing difficult. "You need medical attention," she said with concern. "More than we can provide at a trading post." "I will survive long enough to see Blake face justice," Chief Sandoval replied firmly. "But first we must make sure our testimony reaches the right people." Rodriguez had been watching their back trail for signs of pursuit. "I can see lights moving in the canyon," he reported. "Looks like they're still searching for us in there. But it won't take them long to realize we found another way out." The group began moving north toward the trading post, with Morrison and McKenna supporting Chief Sandoval when the terrain became too difficult for him to navigate alone. The desert night was cold, and they had lost most of their supplies when they abandoned their horses in the canyon. "Tell me about this trading post," Morrison said as they walked. "Can we trust the owner to keep quiet about seeing us?" Chief Sandoval nodded slowly. "Samuel Carter has been trading with Apache bands for 15 years. He is an honest man who treats our people fairly. More importantly, he has no love for the mining companies that have been disrupting his business." The trading post turned out to be a small but well-built structure surrounded by corrals and storage sheds. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating that someone was awake despite the late hour. As they approached, a grizzled man in his 50s emerged from the building with a rifle in his hands. "That's far enough," Carter called out. "State your business or move along." "Samuel, it is Thomas Sandoval," the chief replied, stepping into the light from the trading post windows. "I have need of your friendship." Carter lowered his rifle immediately when he recognized the Apache leader. His expression changed from suspicion to concern as he took in Chief Sandoval's battered appearance and the military uniforms of his companions. "Good Lord, Thomas, what happened to you?" Carter asked, rushing forward to help support the injured man. As they moved inside the warm trading post, Chief Sandoval quickly explained the events of the past few days. Carter listened with growing anger, occasionally muttering curses about the mining companies and their methods. "I've heard rumors about Blake and his operation," Carter said when the story was finished. "Stories about intimidation and threats against anyone who wouldn't sell their land. But kidnapping an Apache chief is a new low, even for him." Maria helped her father sit down near the fire while Carter gathered medical supplies to clean and bandage his wounds. The warmth of the trading post felt wonderful after their cold journey through the desert, but they all knew this was only a temporary refuge. "Blake will come looking for us," Morrison warned Carter. "If he finds us here, he might cause trouble for you too." Carter snorted with derision. "Blake doesn't scare me. I've been dealing with tough customers since before he was born. Besides, I have something he wants, the only reliable source of supplies between here and Tucson. He won't risk making an enemy of me unless he's desperate." As Carter worked on Chief Sandoval's injuries, he shared what he knew about Blake's mining operation. The information painted a picture of a company that was willing to use any methods necessary to acquire the land they wanted. "Blake's been hiring gunmen from as far away as Texas," Carter explained. "Men with questionable pasts who don't ask too many questions about their orders. Word is he's planning something big, but nobody knows exactly what." Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. "What kind of something big?" "There's talk about bringing in federal authorities to declare the Apache lands a security threat," Carter said grimly. "Claims about hostile tribes threatening mining operations and needing military intervention." Chief Sandoval looked up from his bandaged wounds with alarm. "If they convince the government that we are hostile, they could justify taking our lands by force." The implications were staggering. Blake wasn't just trying to acquire mineral rights through intimidation and kidnapping. He was apparently planning to manufacture a crisis that would give the federal government justification to seize Apache lands entirely. "How much time do we have?" Maria asked. Carter considered the question carefully. "From what I've heard, Blake is supposed to meet with territorial officials next week. If he can present evidence of Apache aggression, they might authorize military action against the tribes." Morrison realized the full scope of what they were facing. Blake's kidnapping of Chief Sandoval wasn't just about forcing the tribal council to sign a mining agreement. It was part of a larger plan to eliminate Apache resistance entirely by portraying them as dangerous hostiles who needed to be removed from valuable land. "We need to get to Fort Apache immediately," Morrison said. "I have to send word to my commanding officer and territorial headquarters. They need to know what Blake is really planning." But even as he spoke, Morrison knew the challenges they faced. Blake would claim that Chief Sandoval's accusations were lies told by a hostile Indian trying to protect his land. Without solid evidence of the kidnapping and the broader conspiracy, territorial officials might believe Blake's version of events. What evidence do we have? McKenna asked, echoing Morrison's thoughts. Chief Sandoval reached into his shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper that had somehow survived his ordeal. Before they beat me unconscious, I heard Blake talking to his men about their plans. Later, when they thought I was still unconscious, one of his assistants left this document where I could see it. Morrison unfolded the paper and studied it by firelight. It was a draft letter to territorial officials, written on Consolidated Mining Company letterhead. The document outlined a series of alleged Apache attacks on mining facilities and requested military intervention to protect American business interests. "This is it," Morrison said with excitement. "This proves Blake was planning to fabricate evidence of Apache hostility, but Maria was looking at the document with concern. "Look at the date," she said. "This letter is supposed to be sent tomorrow morning. Blake isn't planning to wait for his meeting next week." The realization hit them all at the same time. Blake's timeline had been accelerated by Chief Sandoval's escape. He would now claim that the rescue attempt was actually an Apache attack on his mining operation, and he would use it as justification for immediate military intervention. "He's going to say we attacked his camp and kidnapped his workers," Rodriguez said grimly. "By the time anyone investigates the truth, he'll have territorial troops occupying Apache lands." Carter stood up from where he had been bandaging Chief Sandoval's ribs. "There might be a way to stop him," he said thoughtfully, "but it would be dangerous and we'd need help from people willing to risk everything." "What do you have in mind?" Morrison asked. "Blake sends a telegraph message to territorial headquarters every morning at 8 o'clock, Carter explained. "The telegraph office is in Copper Creek, about 20 miles from here. If we could intercept that message and replace it with the truth about what really happened, Morrison could see the potential in Carter's plan, but also the enormous risks involved. Blake will have the telegraph office watched, and even if we succeed, he'll just send another message later claiming we interfered with his communications." "Not if we have witnesses," Chief Sandoval said, struggling to his feet despite his injuries. "Apache witnesses who can testify that Blake kidnapped me and held me prisoner." Maria understood what her father was thinking. "You want to bring tribal leaders to Copper Creek to witness Blake's deception?" "More than that," Chief Sandoval replied. "I want to bring every Apache leader within a day's ride, along with any white settlers who have been threatened by Blake's operations. If we can gather enough witnesses and evidence in one place, even territorial officials will have to listen." It was an ambitious plan that would require perfect timing and enormous courage from everyone involved. But as Morrison looked around at the determined faces surrounding him, he realized it might be their only chance to stop Blake's conspiracy before it destroyed the Apache people and sparked a war that would devastate the entire territory. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it. But we'll need to move fast and coordinate with a lot of people in a very short time." Chief Sandoval managed a weak smile. "My people have been coordinating resistance against impossible odds for generations, Captain. If anyone can make this work, we can." As dawn approached, they began planning what might be the most important day in the history of the Apache territory. The sun was barely above the horizon when riders began converging on Copper Creek from all directions. Maria had spent the early morning hours racing between Apache villages, carrying her father's message to tribal leaders throughout the territory. The response had been immediate and overwhelming. Nearly every Apache chief and elder who could travel had answered Chief Sandoval's call for help. Samuel Carter rode beside Morrison as they approached the small frontier town, both men amazed by the number of people who had responded to the emergency. Along with the Apache leaders, several white settlers and ranchers had joined the gathering after hearing about Blake's conspiracy and his threats against anyone who opposed his mining operations. "I've never seen anything like this," Carter muttered, watching the diverse group of riders converging on Copper Creek. Apache and whites working together like this. Blake's greed might have accomplished something nobody thought possible. Morrison nodded grimly. The mining company's aggressive tactics had created enemies among both communities, and now those enemies were united in their determination to stop Blake's plans. But the captain knew that bringing this many people together also created enormous risks. "Blake will see this as an act of war," Morrison warned. "When his men report that Apache warriors are gathering near a white settlement, he'll use it as proof that the tribes are planning an attack." Chief Sandoval, despite his injuries, rode at the front of the Apache delegation. His presence alone had convinced many skeptical leaders to join the effort. The respect he commanded among his people was evident in the way other chiefs deferred to his judgment and followed his lead without question. "That is why we must move quickly," Chief Sandoval replied. "We must present our evidence before Blake can twist our gathering into something it is not." The plan they had developed was complex but necessary. While the main group of witnesses gathered in Copper Creek's central square, a smaller team would infiltrate the telegraph office and intercept Blake's morning message to territorial headquarters. At the same time, other volunteers would document Blake's mining operation and gather evidence of his illegal activities. Rodriguez had volunteered to lead the telegraph office mission, along with 2 Apache warriors who had experience with military communications. Their job was to prevent Blake's false message from reaching territorial officials, while ensuring that the truth about his conspiracy was transmitted instead. "Remember," Morrison told Rodriguez as they prepared to separate, "we need Blake's original message intact as evidence. Don't destroy it until we have witnesses who can testify to its contents." The telegraph office was a small building on the main street of Copper Creek, operated by a middle-aged man named Henderson, who had been serving the community for over a decade. Henderson was known to be honest but also careful about maintaining his neutrality in local disputes. "How do we know he'll cooperate with us?" one of the Apache warriors asked as they studied the building. Rodriguez had been thinking about the same problem. "We don't try to force his cooperation. We simply make sure he understands what's really happening and let him make his own choice." The main group of witnesses gathered in the town square, creating a scene that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Apache chiefs sat alongside white ranchers, all united in their opposition to Blake's predatory business practices. Several territorial citizens had brought their own evidence of Blake's intimidation tactics and threats. Maria stood beside her father as he addressed the gathering, her pride in his leadership mixing with concern for his physical condition. The beatings he had endured were clearly affecting him, but his voice remained strong and his message was clear. "Today we stand together not as Apache or white, but as people who believe in justice," Chief Sandoval told the crowd. "Harrison Blake and his mining company have shown that they will use any method to steal our lands and destroy our communities. We are here to make sure their crimes are exposed to the world." At exactly 8 o'clock, as Blake's daily message was scheduled to be transmitted, Rodriguez and his team entered the telegraph office. Henderson looked up from his equipment with surprise and concern as the 3 armed men approached his desk. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" Henderson asked nervously, clearly recognizing the potential for trouble. Rodriguez placed Blake's intercepted document on the telegraph desk, where Henderson could see it clearly. "We need you to read this message that Harrison Blake plans to send to territorial headquarters this morning," he said calmly. "Then we need you to decide whether you want to be part of sending lies that could start a war." Henderson read the document carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each line. Blake's message painted a vivid picture of Apache aggression and threats against innocent miners, requesting immediate military intervention to protect American business interests. Is this true?" Henderson asked, looking up at the Apache warriors accompanying Rodriguez. "Look out your window," Rodriguez suggested. "Do you see an Apache war party attacking the town? Or do you see people trying to work together to solve a problem?" Henderson peered through his window at the gathering in the town square. Instead of the hostile warriors described in Blake's message, he saw Apache leaders in peaceful discussion with white settlers and territorial citizens. "This message is a lie," Henderson said finally. "Blake's been paying me extra to send his communications without questions. But I won't be part of starting a war based on false information." Within minutes, Henderson was transmitting a very different message to territorial headquarters. Instead of Blake's fabricated claims about Apache hostility, he sent Chief Sandoval's account of his kidnapping and torture, along with evidence of the mining company's conspiracy to manufacture a crisis. But even as their plan succeeded, Maria could see riders approaching Copper Creek from the south. Blake had discovered their gathering and was bringing his private army to break up the witness assembly before territorial officials could respond to the new information. "Riders coming," she called out, pointing toward the dust cloud rising from the desert. Morrison immediately began organizing the defense of the town. The Apache warriors and armed settlers took positions around the square, while non-combatants moved to safer locations. But he knew that a gunfight in Copper Creek would give Blake exactly the kind of evidence he needed to justify his claims about Apache aggression. "We can't let him force us into a battle," Morrison told Chief Sandoval. "If shooting starts here, territorial officials will assume Blake was telling the truth about Apache hostility." Chief Sandoval understood the dilemma perfectly. "Then we must find another way to stop him." Blake and his men thundered into Copper Creek like an army conquering enemy territory. The mining company leader's face was twisted with rage as he took in the scene. Apache leaders meeting peacefully with white settlers, all of them clearly organized in opposition to his plans. "This gathering is illegal," Blake shouted, riding directly toward the center of the square. "These hostile Indians are threatening the safety of American citizens." But Henderson emerged from the telegraph office with the original message Blake had planned to send, along with a copy of the message he had actually transmitted. "Mr. Blake," he called out loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I think Territorial Headquarters needs to know about this document you wanted me to send this morning." Blake's expression changed from anger to something approaching panic as he realized his conspiracy had been exposed. The evidence of his planned deception was now in the hands of dozens of witnesses, and his lies had been replaced with the truth in official communications. "You don't understand the situation here," Blake said, trying to regain control. "These Indians kidnapped me yesterday and held me prisoner. I barely escaped with my life." Chief Sandoval stepped forward, his injuries clearly visible to everyone present. "I am Thomas Sandoval," he announced in a voice that carried across the entire square. 3 days ago, Harrison Blake and his men kidnapped me when I refused to sign away Apache mineral rights. They beat me and held me chained in their camp until Captain Morrison and my daughter rescued me last night." The crowd murmured with anger as they took in the evidence of Chief Sandoval's torture. Several of the white settlers had known and respected the Apache leader for years, and they could see that his injuries were real and severe. Blake looked around desperately, realizing that his lies were not convincing anyone present. But he still had one card left to play. "Even if that were true," he said, "you people are interfering with legitimate business operations authorized by the territorial government." Morrison stepped forward, his military uniform lending authority to his words. "Mr. Blake, I am placing you under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy to defraud the territorial government. Your business operations were never authorized to include criminal activity." But Blake wasn't finished yet. He still had armed men with him, and he still believed he could fight his way out of the situation. As he reached for his weapon, Maria realized that the peaceful resolution they had worked so hard to achieve was about to dissolve into the very violence that would vindicate Blake's claims. The next few seconds would determine whether justice would prevail or whether Blake's conspiracy would succeed through bloodshed. The tension in Copper Creek's town square was so thick it could be cut with a knife as Blake's hand moved toward his holstered weapon. Maria held her breath, knowing that one gunshot would transform their peaceful gathering into the exact kind of violence Blake needed to justify his conspiracy. Around the square, Apache warriors and white settlers alike tensed for the fight that seemed inevitable. But before Blake could draw his weapon, the sound of approaching cavalry trumpets echoed across the desert. A column of blue-uniformed soldiers appeared on the horizon, riding hard toward Copper Creek with their battle flags flying. At their head rode a stern-faced colonel whose arrival changed everything. "Stand down, all of you," Colonel William Hayes commanded as his troops surrounded the square. "By order of Territorial Command, everyone present will remain exactly where they are until this situation is resolved." Blake's expression shifted from desperation to relief as he recognized the military intervention he had been hoping for. "Colonel Hayes, thank God you're here. These hostile Indians have been threatening American citizens and interfering with legitimate mining operations." But Colonel Hayes had received Henderson's telegraph message before leaving Fort McDowell, and he had been briefed on the real situation during his rapid journey to Copper Creek. His response was not what Blake expected. "Mr. Blake, you are under arrest for kidnapping, assault, conspiracy, and attempting to defraud the territorial government," Hayes announced formally. "Sergeant Major, place this man in custody." Blake staggered backward in shock as soldiers moved to apprehend him. "You don't understand, Colonel. These Indians are the criminals here. They attacked my mining camp and kidnapped my workers. The only kidnapping that occurred was your abduction of Chief Thomas Sandoval." Hayes replied coldly. We have multiple witnesses, physical evidence, and your own written documentation of the conspiracy you were planning. As soldiers secured Blake and his hired gunmen, Colonel Hayes turned his attention to Chief Sandoval. The Apache leader was barely standing, supported by Maria and Samuel Carter, but his dignity remained intact despite his injuries. Chief Sandoval, I owe you an apology on behalf of the territorial government, Hayes said formally. We should have investigated Blake's activities much sooner. Your courage in exposing this conspiracy may have prevented a war that would have devastated both our peoples. Chief Sandoval nodded slowly, his voice weak but steady. Justice delayed is not justice denied, Colonel. What matters now is that the truth has been revealed and innocent people on both sides have been protected. Morrison stepped forward to make his report to his superior officer. He had been prepared to face court-martial for his unauthorized actions, but Hayes listened to his account with approval rather than condemnation. Captain Morrison, your decision to assist in this rescue operation showed excellent judgment, Hayes said. Sometimes following orders means doing what's right rather than what's officially authorized. As Blake was led away in chains, his mining operation's future became clear. The territorial government immediately suspended Consolidated Mining's permits and launched a full investigation into their business practices. The evidence of intimidation, fraud, and conspiracy would ensure that Blake and his company faced serious federal charges. Maria watched the soldiers escort Blake from the square and felt a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The nightmare that had begun with her father's kidnapping was finally over, but the cost had been enormous for everyone involved. What happens now? She asked Colonel Hayes. Now we rebuild the trust that men like Blake tried to destroy? Hayes replied. The territorial government is committed to working with Apache leaders to establish fair and legal agreements for land use and mineral rights. Chief Sandoval managed a weak smile. My daughter, we have learned something important from this experience. When people of goodwill work together, even the most powerful criminals cannot succeed. In the weeks that followed, Harrison Blake's trial became one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in territorial history. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and witnesses from both Apache and white communities testified to his crimes and conspiracy. Blake was ultimately sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, and Consolidated Mining Company was dissolved entirely. The peaceful cooperation between Apache leaders and territorial officials during the crisis led to new agreements that protected tribal lands while allowing limited, carefully regulated mining operations. Chief Sandoval, despite his injuries, played a key role in negotiating these agreements until his health was fully restored. Captain Morrison received a commendation for his actions and was promoted to major, with a new assignment to serve as liaison between the military and tribal governments. His experience during the rescue operation had convinced him that cooperation was far more effective than confrontation in resolving conflicts. Maria Sandoval became something of a legend in the territory, known as the young Apache woman who had single-handedly prevented a war by refusing to accept her father's disappearance. She eventually became a leader in her own right, working to ensure that the lessons learned from Blake's conspiracy were never forgotten. Samuel Carter's trading post became an important meeting place where Apache and white leaders could gather to discuss issues of mutual concern. His role in exposing Blake's conspiracy earned him respect from both communities and made his business more successful than ever. 6 months after the confrontation in Copper Creek, a ceremony was held at Fort Apache to honor all those who had worked to prevent the crisis Blake had tried to manufacture. Chief Sandoval, fully recovered from his injuries, spoke to a gathering that included military officers, territorial officials, Apache leaders, and settler representatives. The evil that men like Blake represent will always exist, he said. But this experience has shown us that when good people stand together, evil cannot triumph. The bonds forged during our struggle are stronger than any force that seeks to divide us. Maria stood beside her father during the ceremony, proud of what they had accomplished together, but also aware of the ongoing challenges they would face. The defeat of Blake's conspiracy was just one victory in a larger struggle for justice and equality in the territory. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Morrison approached Maria with a proposal that would shape her future. Miss Sandoval, the territorial government is establishing a new position, an official advocate for Apache interests in territorial affairs. Chief Sandoval has recommended you for the role. Maria considered the offer carefully. It would mean leaving the reservation and working directly with government officials in the territorial capital. But it would also give her the opportunity to prevent future injustices and ensure that her people's voices were heard in important decisions. I accept, she said finally, but only if the position comes with real authority to investigate and prevent the kind of corruption we saw with Blake's operation. That's exactly what we have in mind, Morrison replied with a smile. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, Maria Sandoval looked toward a future filled with both challenges and opportunities. The crisis that had begun with her desperate plea for help had transformed not only her own life but the relationship between two peoples who had learned they had more in common than they had ever realized. The memory of those 3 words, "They kidnapped my father, sir," would always remind her that sometimes the most important actions begin with a single person willing to speak the truth, no matter how dangerous or difficult it might be. In a land where justice was often hard to find, Maria had learned that it was always worth fighting for, especially when good people were willing to stand together against those who would use violence and deception to get their way. The Apache and the cavalry officer who had acted without hesitation to help her had proven that courage and justice could triumph over greed and conspiracy, setting an example that would inspire future generations to stand up for what was right, regardless of the personal cost.